Welcome everyone to Lichfield District Planning Committee meeting on Monday the 20th of July 2026. This is a publicly broadcast meeting that is streamed live via the website and available on YouTube. I would therefore ask that you conduct yourselves in an appropriate manner. I welcome all of those present in the public seating area upstairs and those on the car park. I ask you to be respectful to the committee members, its officers, as well as those who are speaking. I ask that you remain seated and quiet during these procedures. My name is Councillor Checkland, Chair of Lichfield Planning Committee. In a moment, I will ask everyone participating in the meeting to introduce themselves. Before doing so, can I remind everyone in the meeting to ensure that your mobile and electronic devices are either switched off or muted throughout the session. For those who have registered to speak, please ensure that your content is relevant and material to the debate in hand, and that you are mindful of the allotted speaking times. If you go over that time, you will be asked to stop immediately. When speaking, for the particular benefit of those following at home, as well as those in the room, so that they can see and hear you clearly, and I mean that because I'm partially deaf. I have my hearing aids in, so if you could speak up if you are speaking, that'd be lovely. The Planning Committee is a non-political quasi-judicial committee bound by National Planning Policy Framework, Lichfield's local plan and supplementary planning guidance. Our decisions are informed by planning considerations tied to these policies, but it is not a pure science. We must weigh up the benefits and harm when coming to a view. The arrangements for conducting this meeting will be as follows. Officers will introduce each application. Any members of the public or applicants or agents or councillors who have registered to speak will then be invited by me to address the committee in turn. Members are reminded to keep their questions to the point and on matters of clarification for planning issues only. Technical questions or clarification of details of the application will generally be best directed to the officers. Committee members will then discuss and decide on the officers' recommendations on each application. May I also be clear that we cannot receive questions or comments from anyone in the public seating area. Please be assured that the committee will aim to thoroughly question and consider all matters before it in coming to a decision. When we come to the vote on each application, I will ask each member to confirm if they are minded to approve the recommendations in the report by raising their hand. I will then ask those of you voting against the recommendations or abstaining to confirm the specific planning reasons you are doing so. In the event of a vote being carried against the officer's recommendation, I will ask officers to comment on the validity of the planning reasons, and if recommended by officers, we'll ask members to vote again on whether to defer that item for a further report on those reasons. If for any reason a member is not present for the whole of the item, they will be asked not to vote on an application. I will now ask the Planning Committee members and then the officers to participating to introduce themselves. So if I can start on this side, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Councillor Tom Marshall, and I'm from Armitage with Handsacre. Thank you.
Councillor Hugh Ashton, Vice Chair.
Councillor John Hill, Paisley.
Councillor Andrew Rushton.
Councillor David Salter.
Councillor Jayon Anketel.
Councillor Sharon Taylor, Bonyhone Central, Burntwood.
Councillor Di Evans.
Councillor Michael Galvin.
Councillor Anne Hughes.
Councillor Keith Vernon, Poulton and the Ridways.
Councillor Joe Powell.
Councillor Sonia Clovelly from Albury Wasson Cradley.
And the officers now, please.
Gillian Pinamorel, Senior Planner at LW.
Kerry Challoner, Planning and Development Manager.
Max Howard, Legal Advisor.
Mark Hooper, Governance Manager and Monitoring Officer.
Mark Evans, Deputy County Council Highways.
I was waiting for that, Chair. Christine Lewis, Elections and Democratic Manager.
Sinead Cartwright, Governance Officer.
Thank you very much. Those are the people involved in today's meeting. There are 3 other councillors sat here on the left-hand side. They are here for monitoring purposes. Right. Moving on to the first item on the agenda, that's apologies for absence, please. Any apologies? None at all. Thank you. Declarations of interest, please. Councillor Marshall.
Chairman, thank you very much. I have to declare a prejudicial interest in the first application, which is 25/01485/OUTM. The landowners in question are well known to me. They're good friends of 50 years standing. So I'm afraid I shan't be able to take part in the debate and I shall be leaving the chamber. Thanks.
Any further declarations? Thank you. The minutes of the previous meeting, you've all had an opportunity to see these. Any matters arising from those minutes? Can I take them as read? Thank you. Moving on to the first of the 2 planning applications. This is 25/01485/OUTM. Land at Coulter Lane Farm, Coulter Lane, Burntwood. I will now ask Gillian Pinner-Morell to do the presentation for me.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an outline application for up to 250 dwellings with associated infrastructure, with all matters safe access reserved at Coulter Lane Farm, Burntwood. That location plan is shown on. Second slide is an aerial photograph of the site. The 2 stars shown in yellow. The one to the south is Fulton Cottage, which is a Grade 2 listed building located on Church Road. The one to the west is another Grade 2 listed building, which is Fulton, and that's on Rugeley. In terms of the site photographs, photograph 2 actually shows the access to the site. Number 59 Church Road will be demolished and the access will be widened to facilitate the development. Photograph 1 is actually taken from Church Road across the site. You can just see the hedgerow to properties in uplands to the northwest. Photograph 3 and 4 are actually taken from Church Road looking across the site. Photograph 5 is actually taken from uplands looking across to where an area of open space is proposed. And photograph 6 is from Coulter Lane, shows the general area of where allotments are facilitated. Photograph 7 again is from Coulter Lane, showing the same area of land. And photograph 8 is taken further up Coulter Lane with the application site to the west. You can just see the access is on the left. As part of the application proposal, a development framework plan has been submitted. As you can see, that shows potential areas of where residential parcels of development can be accommodated, with areas of open space and ecological enhancement to the west, with further areas of open space to the west and north, which will be accessible to members. Part of the application submission, the applicants have also provided this section to show the relationship of the southern boundary of the site to the nearest residential property, which is Fulton Cottage. And what it indicates is an area of landscaping to that boundary, with the possibility of facilitating bungalows at the closest point, which, as you can see from the cross-section at the bottom, would achieve a separation distance between the two properties of Fulham Cottage and new residential development of approximately. In terms of access, the site will be accessed via Church Road itself. A second access is proposed to the east of that, but that will just be for cycleways and for pedestrian access. As part of the application, it's intended to divert the number 61 bus from Rugeley Road down Church Road into the application site to actually facilitate and serve the future occupants of the development. In order to achieve this, it will necessitate some improvement to the actual junction of Rugeley Road and Church Road, you can see there. And in addition, the applicants goes in a zebra crossing with zigzag lining on. In addition, a further zebra crossing is proposed on Church Road itself, close to the proposed cycle route into the site and also Christchurch. That zebra crossing will also have zigzag lines to either side. In terms of whether the site is grey belt, the report actually concludes that the site doesn't meet purposes A, B or D of paragraph 1. Nor does it conclude that the application of is relating to areas or assets of the provider using. It's there that is great. In terms of whether the development is inappropriate, it's considered that the residential development of the wouldn't cross the area of the plan. It's also considered that there is a demonstration of this type given the council. It's also concluded the site is sustainable and the development proposes a delivery of 43 affordable homes. Also therefore concluded the development meets the Golden Rule. Part of the application, the applicants have also submitted 2 images, which are computer-generated images of how the development may look. This is actually taken from Coulter Lane, those 3D. Right. And this is actually taken from Church Road. So in terms of the planning considerations, it's concluded that the site, due to the council's lack of a 5-year supply of deliverable housing sites, paragraph 11D of the National Planning Policy Framework is engaged and the presumption of sustainable development. Do you want me to repeat that bit? Hopefully everyone can hear. So in terms of the planning considerations, the principle of development, as a council cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing land, and therefore the local plan housing land allocations and supply policies are out of date, paragraph 11D of the National Planning Policy Framework is engaged and the presumption in favour of sustainable development. In terms of heritage assets, it's concluded there would be a very low degree of less than substantial harm to the significance of Fultham Cottage and Fultham through development within their relative setting, but that very low degree of less than substantial harm identified is outweighed by the public benefits of the proposal. In terms of character and appearance, it's considered the landscape and visual effects of the development will be mitigated through the positioning of the residential parcels and also the large areas of open space, which seek to soften the development edge. The development framework plan sets out the broad structure and elements. It's anticipated a future detailed design will follow, and it's considered the site can deliver a quantum of 25 dwellings, subject to matters reserved for subsequent approval. In terms of residential amenity, it's considered the site can achieve an acceptable residential environment for existing and future occupants. And in terms of access and highway safety, a transport and travel plan form part of the application. A road safety audit provides an independent assessment of the proposed site access and diverted bus route, and Staffordshire County Council Highway Authority has no objection, subject to conditions and a financial contribution. In terms of ecology and arboricultural, the development is considered to not adversely affect local ecology and will provide mandatory biodiversity net gain. And as landscaping is reserved and given the extensive areas of green infrastructure proposed, it's considered an acceptable planting scheme can be achieved. In terms of green belt, the site does not contribute strongly to purposes A, B or D of the National Planning Policy Framework. The application of policies relating to areas or assets 7 do not provide a strong reason for restricting or refusing development. The residential development of the site would not undermine the purposes taken to the remaining green belt across the period, and the site is considered grey belt. There is a demonstrable need for this type of development given the council's lack of 5-year supply of deliverable housing sites. The site is in a sustainable and the development proposal proposes the delivery of 43% affordable homes and also provides the required. Therefore concluded the development meets the golden rules and is not inappropriate development in the green belt. In terms of other matters, it's considered the loss of best and most versatile land will be negligible, that there's no compelling evidence to demonstrate that the loss of farmland would have a significant effect on food production and security. Oh. Well, I talk quite loudly and I have been talking into the mic. Well, unfortunately, it's quite difficult to negotiate the two. So in terms of other matters and 106, the loss of best and most versatile land is considered negligible. There's no compelling evidence to demonstrate that the loss of the farmland would have a significant effect on food production and security. And the Section 106 agreement will secure the provision of affordable housing, financial contributions and sports provision in the Cannock Chase Act. The recommendation is for approval, Chairman, subject to the satisfactory completion of 106 agreement.
Yep. Thank you very much, Julian. I appreciate we aren't normally in this room. It's not the same presentation surrounds that we're used to. Hopefully you'll be able to hear me. Before I go to the councillors, we've got 3 speakers in relation to this. We have an objector, Tim Hall Woodcock. Is that yourself, sir? Thank you. Ward member, Councillor Mears. After that is the applicant, Neil Cox. So I must tell you, you have 5 minutes in which to speak. Your time will start when you start to speak. When you just have 30 seconds left so that you can get your conclusion if need be, you will be reminded that there are just 30 seconds left. At the end of 5 minutes, I do ask that you stop speaking. Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Hall Woodcock.
No problem. Good evening, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Tim Hall Woodcock and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the Burntwood Action Group, representing the formal technical objectors to this application and a swathe of Burntwood residents, many of whom are here today. Our community is not here to offer emotional pleas. We're here because the technical reports underpinning this case file are fundamentally disconnected from reality. While our ward councillor addresses the severe planning policy and legal errors in the scheme, my role is to direct your attention to 4 critical factual failures within the officer's report. First, let's look at the proposed housing mix. We are told this application is acceptable because the developer has offered us a 43% housing package. Let me make this understandable. 8% of that so-called package is made up of discount market sale properties. In writing on this active case file, the senior policy officer admitted that the recent completions of these exact property types in early 2026 suffered a total lack of demand. 2/3 of those properties could not be sold locally. Why? Because people on local wages cannot secure mortgage on them. When these properties inevitably fail to sell locally, the developer is legally permitted to drop the restrictions and sell them on the open market to anybody, including out-of-district people. It is entirely irrational to permanently pave over our greenfield buffer to build a housing model that this council's own data proves Burntwood residents cannot buy, cannot afford, and do not want. Second, we must ask, is this site actually sustainable? The answer is no. This development creates a car-dependent enclave with zero local connectivity. If you build 250 homes here, where are these people going to go to the doctor? Our GP surgeries and dentists are already fully subscribed and at breaking point. The Integrated Care Board claims there's adequate capacity, but their claim relies on the delivery of the new Burntwood Health Centre. That health centre has been a promise for 16 years. Not a single brick has been laid and it doesn't even have planning permission. Also, it's just a replacement for the one that closed before in Burntwood Baths. Because there are no local services, these new residents will be forced into their cars for every basic survival need. They will always have to drive. Adding hundreds of daily car journeys into an already gridlocked area is the exact opposite of sustainable development. This brings us to the third point, our schools. Look at the Staffordshire County Council School Organisation report. It concludes that 250 home development is acceptable because it requires zero financial contributions for local education. To suggest that introducing 250 family homes to Burntwood will place zero pressure on our schools is an insult to every parent in the town. The County Council has arrived at this zero contribution figure by relying on obsolete pre-crisis capacity models. Salford and EDA are at capacity right now. Accepting a deal that requires zero developer funding to support our local schools is a failure of basic municipal oversight. Finally, we must address the collapsed evidence base. The case officer's report asks you to approve this major edge of settlement expansion on the assumption that our local infrastructure can cope. But how can you make that judgment when the council is measuring this development's impact against an infrastructure delivery plan that has not been updated since 2021? Since 2021, Burntwood has already absorbed new housing developments, and now they're proposing to dump even more onto the exact same fragile town. 5 years, there's been no update to our infrastructure baseline detailing the true physical capacity of our roads, schools and medical facilities. Worse, evaluating this application in isolation ignores the fact that Burntwood is currently facing a multi-developer siege compromising of 1,350 concurrent speculative homes targeting sites like Highfields and Rake Hill. Councillors, the Burntwood Action Group have done the heavy lifting to expose these gaps. We've provided you with the facts. Do not let this developer check their corporate checkbox at the expense of Burntwood's future. I urge you to reject this unsustainable, non-compliant application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall-Woodcock. The next speaker is Councillor Mears. As the ward councillor, she is entitled to speak for up to 10 minutes if she requires. Once again, there'll be a 30-second notice as you approach that 10 minutes, and it starts whenever you start to speak.
Good evening, Chair, members. I speak tonight as ward councillor for Highfields, the boundary where our town meets open countryside. My purpose is simple: to give you clear, policy-based reasons why this application must be refused, and why doing so is legally safe, defensible, and free from appeal risk. Every reason I present you is already logged on the planning portal. Every point is grounded in adopted policy or published evidence, and nothing here is speculative. I have six strong reasons for refusal to share with you. The first point. Members, the officer's report is fundamentally misleading regarding the Greenbelt. The Greenbelt Review 2026, published on the LDC website, is not the final document. Our officers have confirmed in writing that it is only stage 1. The stage 2 assessment, the one that actually defines the developable sites, is at least a year away. This means there's no lawful basis to classify Coulter Lane as Greybelt. LDC officers explicitly state that this land makes a strong contribution to Greenbelt, and legally it currently remains protected Greenbelt. National policy requires 3 tests for Greenbelt release. The first test is very special circumstances. There are none. The second test is formal Greybelt designation. There is no designation. And the third test is a genuine 5-year supply deficit. Unfortunately, this has been caused by the council's own 13-month delay, and so this cannot be used by the council for justification to demonstrate a compelling public interest case that outweighs Greenbelt harm. Under the Court of Appeal ruling in Keeping Chiswell Green, you cannot ignore your own newly published Greenbelt evidence, and approving this scheme would mean disregarding the independent assessment by Arup, who did the Greenbelt assessment, the moment a developer applies pressure. The second point I'd like to raise is the Lichfield District Council Design Code 2024. We have a direct policy conflict. Our Lichfield District Design Code cannot be ignored, overridden, or treated as optional guidance. It is adopted policy and legally binding on all members of this committee. It requires protection of rural edges, respect for the landscape setting, and prevention of suburban massing at settlement boundaries. Tonight's speculative application for a 250-home suburban estate actually breaches all 3. Approving it would place this council in immediate conflict with its own flagship design policy. The Burntwood Action Group has already prepared grounds for judicial review, and this has legal representation ready to act. This is a guaranteed challenge from all residents of Burntwood, whose interests we all represent. The third point I'd like to raise is heritage. Footnote 7 actually removes the tilted balance. The officer's report admits permanent less than substantial harm to Grade 2 listed Fulton Cottage and Fulton Farmhouse. LDC officers argue that the housing shortfall outweighs this harm. Legally, that is incorrect, as now illustrated in case law from the Wrotham High Court judgment in June 2024. This states that when a designated heritage asset is harmed, footnote 7 of the NPPF is triggered. Now, footnote 7 switches off the tilted balance towards allowing development. So case law now prevents housing numbers legally being allowed to outweigh heritage harm. This site is a 1765, that's the year, endowment landscape surrounded by Grade 2 listed heritage assets. Building a 12.5 metre high housing estate would overwhelm and permanently damage that historic setting. Footnote 7 exists to prevent exactly this kind of harm, and under the Wrotham judgment, that alone is a decisive policy-anchored reason for refusal, which has already been proven in court. Point 4. Highways, a severe and documented safety failure. The applicant's transport assessment is based on lunchtime traffic counts, which is actually the quietest period of the day. Paragraph 15.26 of LDC's own officer's report confirms that the National Highways model does not include existing peak hour delays at A5 junctions. They openly admit that their model ignores the daily gridlock. Staffordshire Police Enforcement Log 682-898-236 confirms that Church Road collapses under school-run traffic, trapping emergency vehicles. Our time-stamped video shows cars forced onto the pavements, driving along the very space used by children walking to school. This is not congestion. It is a live police-recorded safety failure, putting children and vulnerable pedestrians at direct risk of being injured or killed on a daily basis. Under NPPF paragraph 115, development must be refused where there is an unacceptable impact on highway safety. Injecting another 146 vehicles onto the road network at peak times into a police-logged hazard zone is where traffic is driving on the pavement without modelling existing delays is the exact definition of unacceptable. Point 5. Ecology, the council's own legal contradiction. Our community submitted an asset of community value nomination proposing a managed nature reserve on the land of the planning application. The council's legal department have rejected it, and their reasoning is devastating in regard to the planning application before you tonight. LDC have stated that restricting footpaths to protect sensitive ground nesting birds and ecology meant that community use was ancillary to the nature that was already on the site. In other words, LDC officers have confirmed that the interior of this site is so ecologically sensitive that even adding limited foot traffic to it is harmful. Yet tonight, officers are asking you to approve 250 houses, roads, street lighting, domestic pets, and all manner of suburban use on the exact same habitat that they said was too sensitive for controlled access on foot. You cannot reject a nature reserve because the ecology is too sensitive, but then turn around and grant approval for 250 houses on the same land. That is an indefensible contradiction. Under NPPF paragraph 180, if significant harm to biodiversity cannot be avoided, mitigated, or compensated, permission must be refused. And now I come to point 6, prematurity or the silo trap. The officer's report claims cumulative impact cannot be assessed because other speculative schemes do not yet have permission. Yes, this is the first application in Burntwood of at least 4, but it doesn't mean it should be dealt with in isolation. But members, approving the scheme actually creates the cumulative impact. Burntwood currently faces over 1,350 speculative homes. If each is assessed in isolation while our local plan is frozen in its 30-month reset, you're allowing developers to dictate the district's housing footprint by stealth. Under NPPF paragraphs 49 and 50, this is called planning prematurity, and it occurs when a decision undermines the emerging local plan and it allows developers to shape the district's housing pattern before the plan is complete. This is one of the strongest legal grounds for refusal, and it is considered a procedural error, and also it is a trigger for judicial review. In conclusion, I realise I've run through these points very quickly. There's a lot of information to share. Members, every major strand of adopted policy points in one direction, which is refusal. The current Greenbelt Stage 1 assessment is incomplete. The Lichfield Design Code, we must comply. NPPF footnote 7, the heritage protections, case law now brings this to the front. Safety requirements under NPPF for residents, those using the pavements. Ecological protections under NPPF paragraph 193, the environment which Greenbelt is designed to protect, and prematurity under the NPPF paragraph 49 and 50. We don't need to put ourselves at risk. To approve this application would not be a planning judgment, it would be a procedural error. It would be irrational, unsafe, and legally indefensible. The public are watching and present here with us, and many more are watching this online. The strength of feeling from local residents against this application is incredibly strong, as can be seen by the number of objections against it online, on the planning portal, and from those here present. The monitoring officer has received a probity complaint, and the grounds for judicial review are drafted. You are not being asked to take a risk tonight. You are simply being asked to uphold the law. That's great, thank you. The only lawful, rational and policy compliant decision is refusal. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Councillor Mears. The third speaker tonight is the applicant, Neil Cox.
Thank you, Chair. I'm grateful to members for giving me the opportunity to address you tonight on behalf of Bloor Homes. The proposed development is for up to 250 homes, of which 43% would be provided as affordable to directly benefit the 647 households currently on the housing waiting list. This should also be considered in the context of an acute housing land supply shortfall and a gross need of 368 affordable homes per year within the district. Burntwood is identified within the adopted local plan as an other large centre, second only to Lichfield City in the settlement hierarchy. This is a sustainable settlement where housing growth is to be focused, playing an important role in accommodating new homes. To play an important role, development within the Greenbelt is required. This is not a new proposal. The site was previously identified as a safeguarded site to meet longer-term housing needs by the council. It's long been recognised by the council that this is a good site to meet housing needs in Burntwood. The site is located within the Greenbelt. However, the contribution the site makes to Greenbelt purposes is not strong. This is confirmed by the council's own Greenbelt assessment, which classifies the land as Greybelt subject to footnote 7 considerations. The site falls outside of all footnote 7 exclusions. It is agreed with officers that the site falls within the national policy definition of Greybelt. As the council cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply and the proposal meets the government golden rules, including a 15% uplift to affordable housing and significant new publicly accessible open space, the proposed development is acceptable in principle within the Greenbelt. This is confirmed by national guidance. Also, as confirmed by national guidance, a development which complies with the golden rules should be given significant weight in favour of the grant of permission. The proposal before members has generated a lot of public concern, including around 50 separate submissions from BAC. However, the professional experts the council should rely upon raise no objection to the proposal. As a result, the proposed development now comes before committee with no objections from technical consultees, including policy, housing, conservation, archaeology, environmental health, highways, flood risk, ecology, arboriculture, education and healthcare. They confirm harm to heritage assets, whether designated or not, is within the less than substantial spectrum and at the lower end. The local highway authority has no objections subject to conditions and contributions. National Highways recommends approval subject to conditions. The LLFA position is that a compliance drainage scheme and delivery of a site with resilience to flood risk has been demonstrated. The appropriate assessment concludes that the proposal will not result in an adverse effects on the integrity of any European site. The ICB confirms adequate primary care capacity will be available to meet future demands. And county education analysis concludes that an education contribution would not be sought from this development. As always, members of the committee are asked to apply the planning balance. Recognising this balancing exercise is already tilted in favour of sustainable development. The case officer's thorough report identifies a professional opinion of less than substantial harm to heritage assets at the lower end of such harm. Landscape and visual harm that would be appropriately mitigated by the development, viewed in the context of established built form and proposed landscaping, and a negligible harm from the loss of BMV. In terms of benefits, in addition to the very substantial benefits the case officer affords to the provision of market and affordable homes, the proposal provides new play facilities, allotments and publicly accessible open space far in excess of policy requirements, together with the potential to exceed 10% biodiversity net gain. Weight should also be afforded to the expenditure on construction and investment in the area as a result of the proposal. The applicant has agreed all identified contributions towards local and strategic infrastructure to mitigate identified impacts, including on-site open space, financial contributions towards St Matthew's Cricket Club, improvements to the bus service and off-site highways works. This is in addition to SIL monies, which will be paid and allocated to infrastructure projects by both LDC and Birchwood Town Council. In summary, the proposal clearly meets government golden rules and would deliver substantial benefits. There are no objections from technical consultees and no adverse impacts have been identified that would even come close to significantly and demonstrably outweighing the substantial benefits of the proposal to be delivered. These conclude my remarks, and I very much hope members are reassured that Blore can bring forward a good development which can meet all of the Section 106 obligations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cox, for those people who didn't hear me the first time. Right, coming to the councillors now for questions. I suspect we are going to hear from our highways officer at some point, Mark Evans, but I'll let the question come first rather than ask you to explain something before it's been asked. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm going to move refusal of this application for a number of reasons, and certainly the development that we have seen generated tonight on the screen, in my mind, sticks out like a sore thumb. This area is a green belt, and as such requires protection from developers, and many people are concerned about the desecration of the area, including Birchwood Town Council. I accept that landscaping is a reserved matter, but this is an attractive, tranquil and peaceful area full of wildlife, trees and hedgerows that are vital for the environment and to provide a healthy lifestyle. The open area and the vista it affords now is important too, as is the ecological value. For many years, the community of Birchwood has been promised adequate infrastructure, and despite many properties having been built, we are still awaiting, which is more than a little frustrating. In particular, our health facilities, both medical and dental, are totally inadequate and have been for many years, despite the County Council telling us numerous times a planning application is imminent. It still has not materialised. We need to see action for these facilities before more houses are built here.
But Councillor Evans, have you got any questions for the officers for clarification? This sounds a bit like one of the presentations we've just had.
Well, I am trying to explain why the infrastructure, in my view, is not adequate. So, do you want me to stop, or can I?
No, by all means, if if you're proposing refusal and giving the grounds for that refusal,
I have got the grounds for refusal at the end of my presentation.
Thank you.
We have lost infrastructure rather than gain it, and I hope that we can get some answers to that, including provision for young people to have facilities to enjoy themselves during leisure times, and it's particularly true for young people. The developer has stated that the required infrastructure will be delivered, but we have heard this so many times and it just becomes false, and I hope that will materialise in the end, and that's why people are sceptical about this, and I do need some answers about that. Staffordshire County Council School Organisation have said that their additional school places will not be required, but surely at this end of the town there are bound to be a number of children from nursery 2-year-olds up to post 16 who will require places in schools. And I haven't seen any justification to say that that is not so. And people do not want to have to necessarily travel the distance. I do accept that the birth rate is declining, but if we build properties here and people are experiencing problems, the schools will be under intense pressure due to the sheer number of children requiring places, so that we don't want this to happen again. It's happened in the past, and we need to ensure that we've got adequate provision now. And I need an answer to that as well. The County Council Highways Department has said the road system can cope with minor adjustments, but it is just not close to the site. but the roads leading actually to it that are totally unsuitable, despite what we've heard. And they can't be altered because the Rugeley Road from Swan Island is often very congested due to its narrowness and because cars are parked there due to it being very little off-street parking. So equally, further up the road by Fulford School and the Memorial Hall, there are always numerous complaints regarding parking of cars for the parents to drop off their children. And again, I don't think this has been addressed, and the problem will be exacerbated with new houses. And especially for cars around school time and HGVs going to the development, if it does go ahead. We're talking about public transport being provided to serve the new development and surrounding area, but we cannot cope with the traffic now, and certainly it will be extremely difficult for buses to navigate the narrow, congested roads, particularly at peak times. And again, I don't see that situation has been addressed. The County Council Local Flood Authority did initially state that the flooding and drainage strategy did not conform with national standards, but now the County Council have agreed to that. How come that has happened? And will there be, therefore, problems in the future? We have heard in the past of future developments, that have gone ahead and have caused extreme drainage and problems. So for all those reasons, I want to move refusal of the application on loss of important green belt, which is significant, total lack of infrastructure that Burntwood requires now and in the future, and on highways grounds that I've mentioned, which includes widths of roads and inevitable congestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. The 3 points that you were suggesting refusal under were Greenbelt, infrastructure and highways. I'm going to come to the officer in relation to Greenbelt on infrastructure, and then I'll go to Mark Evans in relation to the highways question. If any officers have any other questions for the officers here, rather than the type of speech we've just heard, we need to be getting to the points that are relevant to the actual application, please. I've got a list of people that do want to speak, but we'll go for those two answers first, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of points. On Greenbelt, obviously there's a clear process considering whether development either firstly grey belt and inappropriate. So it's a clear process that has to be followed, and it's not a reason this to simply on the fact that it's attractive side. That's simple. Equally, in terms of infrastructure, developer has made all of the contributions requested. There's clearly something wrong with my mic because I'm shouting as much as I can, and I do have a loud voice. I trust you can hear me now. So can you hear that? There's obviously a problem with my mic. So in terms of the Greenbelt, what I was saying is that there's a clear procedural process that needs to be followed that's laid out clearly in terms of the National Planning Policy Framework. It's not a reason for refusal to simply say that it's green land and countryside. Equally, in terms of infrastructure, the developer has provided all of the contributions that have been requested. The Education Authority were originally consulted and didn't require a contribution. They then said if the application isn't determined within a 6-month period, we want to be reconsulted, which we did. They came back again and said they did not require a contribution. If the Education Authority say they don't require a contribution for school places, the local planning authority can't require a figure to be requested from a developer. It would be against our planning laws. Equally, the Integrated Care Board have said they don't require a contribution because of the new facility that's intended in Burntwood. Again, the local planning authority can't request a financial sum for a developer that hasn't been requested. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and shout my loudest. If I may, Chair, just to give a bit of a background summary of where we started this journey, pardon the pun, to then answer Councillor Evans's question. The applicant approached Staffordshire County Council a while ago with regards seeking pre-application advice to this application before it became a live planning application. At that time, we gave comments and thoughts to the applicant on what they needed to do, what they needed to look at, and what they needed to review as and when a live planning application came forward. Obviously, before you tonight, and as you've heard, a live application has been submitted with a required transport assessment, and that is a document that any application of this size is required to produce. And that's what we as a highway authority have gone through with a fine-tooth comb and made a decision that we approve the application subject to conditions. Now, in terms of what I've heard in terms of speeches that have been made this evening, and obviously Councillor Evans very recently, is the County Council, along with our own county councillors, at the time of the application, agreed junctions to be assessed by the applicant. The assessment of those junctions is found within the transport assessment. I have it in front of me. They do show peak hour traffic on the assessment that the applicant did, and it is off those surveys in the peak hours. It's from 7 till 10 and from in the evenings until 7. So those details are within the transport assessment, the baseline where it all starts, and it is the applicant that has factored those up in terms of what the housing development before you tonight would generate in terms of traffic flows. We have worked with the applicant and their transport consultants on the junctions that we see as needing assessment, and obviously National Highways, who are a separate body who aren't here tonight, also were in that process with regard to the A5, which is a trunk road, which is their responsibility. So both highway authorities worked with the applicant, and we worked through the statutory processes, which what forms that transport assessment. And as you all know, members, we've been here before, there is a set process and procedure that officers must follow. It's not a gut feeling, it's not a gut decision. A decision is based on facts, and facts that are defendable should we end up in an appeal situation. The conclusion of the Highway Authority was that all of the roads in question were of a suitable width, to answer Councillor Evans's question. If they were not of a suitable width, they would not be public highway. It is as simple as that. There are minimum width requirements to become a public highway. Those minimal widths are met. That is why they are currently a public highway. The widths that are present are able to cater for a bus. A bus is only 2.5 metres wide, not much wider than a large SUV. Yes, it's longer, but it's not wider. It's the same width as a refuse lorry and as an ambulance. It can't be any wider by law. In terms of congestion, again mentioned by Councillor Evans, I sympathise with councillors and everybody in the room. It's a matter of fact, there will be more vehicles on the road. However, going back to the rules and the regulations that we all are governed by as officers and members, The National Planning Policy Framework states we can only, as a highway authority, recommend refusal either on a severe impact, that's the cumulative impact of what's there now and what is to be put on top, or on highway safety grounds. It was our conclusion that neither of those tests were met and neither of those tests were defensible if we should end up in an appeal situation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, first off, I'd like to second Councillor Evans' proposal to reject this. The reason I'm minded for that is listen to this description of this green belt as, farmland that is, isn't used as farmland. Now, I travel down Church Road most days, and until recently, there were sheep on there. It's an active farm that is being used as a farm. It's not just pretty land. So I really don't understand how this isn't green belt that should be protected. The second part, I've just listened to the highways. Now, anybody knows if you travel that part of Burntwood in rush hour with the schools, it's a single lane. I drive a Mini. I struggle to get a Mini down. So how are you going to get a bus through it? Which is, like I say, slightly bigger than an SUV. And personally, I feel let down by our local county councillors who, despite promising the world, haven't delivered anything here. And finally, with health, we know that our health centres, our GPs, close to capacity. We haven't got planning yet for a new doctor's surgery. How on earth this decision has been made that we don't require any more support around that? I really don't understand it. So the question is, how did that decision come to be? Because I just disagree with it. It seems a little local knowledge of the area. And you can see the sign for wrong time, wrong place. I actually think it's the right time for building houses. I disagree with the Burntwood Action Group for that part, but it's definitely the wrong place because it's unsustainable because of the roads and the health. My children have grown up. I don't know a lot about the local schools. I'm not governor, so I can't speak on that. But my two reasons, like I said, highways and health.
So we've just had reiteration of the reasons, and we've had the officer and the highways officer explain those situations. So I'm not going to ask them to explain them again. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. You'll have to bear with me. As the councillors know, I've been unwell recently. I have a number of reasons back. Councillor Evans's refusal. There is an unresolved blood risk objection. The lead local flood authority recorded update response maintains that permissions should not be granted because the resubmitted drainage strategy does not demonstrate explicit source controlled measures in line with the national SUD standard. This conflicts with the officer's conclusion in paragraph 14.7 that the LLFA's objection has been resolved. Harm to Greenbelt, the county's own, the county's own Staffordshire Greenbelt study, as Councillor Mears has already said, says it makes a strong contribution to Greenbelt. And this is, and I don't think the officers have allowed this in their conclusions. Excuse me, I'm just going to skip to Princes Park. I don't think there's been enough assessed traffic reporting done and the impact on this bit of heritage. Princes Park is really valued to the people of Burntwood, and I don't think highways have thought about the impact of rat run traffic caused by this development around Princes Park Island. I would just like to come back to the highways, gentlemen. You can park on both sides of those roads. I'm a wheelchair user. Now, most of those cars will park halfway on the pavement or, close to the edge. That still means that I have to go into the road to travel down the road. So no, there isn't there isn't enough infrastructure in that area. Supporting heritage and harm to Fulton Cottage and Fulton Farmhouse. The conservation officer recalls a slightly greater contribution from the surviving rural setting of the significance of these properties as very low. But I don't think they've given enough weight to this. And the assessments, described were not significant, were not substantial enough. Councillor Mears has already spoken and stolen my thunder when it came to most of my other points. But I'd just like to say that when I've worked for national and SME house builders all my career until I couldn't work anymore, and this development is not a bad development, it's just in the wrong place. There are plenty of places in and around Burnwood that are in much better locations with much better infrastructure and roads, and they would not put as much pressure on the town of Burnwood.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I'm going to let the officer come back in relation to the LLFA, the Local Lead Flood Authority, and possibly the conservation issue, as we've covered the traffic issues previously.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. In terms of the Flood Authority, they did originally object to the application as is stated in my report, but as is also stated in my report, following discussions with the Flood Authority and the submission of a revised flood risk assessment and drainage strategy, the Flood Authority withdrew their objection and recommend approval subject to conditions. In terms of the effect on the heritage assets, that's obviously considered in the report, and advice is taken from the conservation officer on that, who identified of the two listed buildings there would be a low level of less than substantial harm, and the framework makes it clear that then needs to be assessed against the public benefits of the proposal, which is what has been done in the officer report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm got some more sort of open questions because I'm not decided yet about, whether I will support the motion that everyone else has put forward. My first question was about the Greenbelt, but it was a very specific one. I can see that the arguments that the land doesn't contribute significantly to, is it B and D? But in paragraph 17 it does say that this contributes at least moderately aspect A of, urban sprawl. It does seem to me that we do need to have more detailed, specific justification about whether this is green belt or grey belt. I'm going to get on to new questions. I'm also a bit confused about the schools thing, because our experience in the Lichfield developments, of which there have been many, is there's a formula. They say so many primary, and we have, 4 or 5 new primary schools in Lichfield as a result of development. So is the argument that there's lots of space in Burntwood School? Because it's not logical to say there will be no children in these 250 houses. So I think there are some details to be worked out now. I'm also, because we've had such different views and we have all these value judgments about what less than substantial harm might be, I do want some clarification on the housing mix. And is there social housing now, or is it we all know that affordable housing often isn't affordable if it's discounted market rates. So I'm not clear exactly what the current housing mix proposed is. And then on transport, I haven't done this route at rush hour, but I've been to see it. And the road, as well as the Church Road things, there is also Coulter Lane. I understand that that's for bikes and pedestrians, but that is a very narrow road, and whether that's sustainable. So without SA being, initially utterly opposed to it, I do think we need some more detailed, sort of granular justification rather than just rival statements about a lot of these issues.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. I'll come back to the officer again in relation to the education, but education make their own decisions, so I'll pass you back.
Yes, that's right, Chairman. And the fact that, as the councillor rightly said, that significant and substantial contributions have been sought for sites in Lichfield, it's the same formula that the County Council are using in assessing the Burntwood site as they have every other site in Lichfield district. So the fact that they've said there's large sums required on sites in Lichfield where there's clearly a need for school places suggests that there isn't a need for school places in Burntwood and that the schools have sufficient capacity. We can only accept what the County Council are saying. As I've said before, we can't legally request contributions that don't exist, quite frankly. In terms of the affordable housing, if I can just say to the member that it does actually state this in paragraph 12.36. The provision will be a 35% policy compliant of 65 social rent and 35% shared ownership, with the remaining being made up of the 8% discount market share. Now, in terms of the discount market share, it is an acceptable form of affordable housing. It's quite clearly stated so in the glossary to the National Planning Policy Framework, and the Housing Strategy Officer is happy with the 8% of discounted market proposed.
Thank you. Mark Evans, I believe you want to come back on something.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, as a non-expert, I'm not here as a representative of the Education Authority. However, a little bit of knowledge can be dangerous sometimes, but I think it may be worth stating, Chair. I've been in a meeting with education colleagues this morning in a neighbouring authority discussing a housing application that hasn't got a school as part of its planning application. And what came out of that meeting this morning was the local schools had capacity and they were not asking the developer for a contribution because the neighbouring primary schools and secondary schools had enough spaces going forward. Now, the County Council Education Authority has a policy, and that equates to houses equals pupils. Now, if the Education Authority has stated it's gone through its policy and it doesn't believe it needs a contribution to build a new school, then it doesn't. And the County Council, it was reiterated to me this morning in a meeting, the County Council doesn't build schools to mothball them because it's their asset, which they've got to maintain. They only require it when it's required. And what they don't want to do is to jeopardise the existing schools in the neighbourhood by opening a new one, which puts those at threat. We all know it's difficult to get and retain teachers, and by opening a school that's only half full makes the situation worse. So forgive me for chipping in, Chair, but I thought it's just useful from a County Council perspective, with the little knowledge that I do have, just to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I've got to be honest, it does seem a little bit bizarre that a new estate doesn't make a contribution towards education, because even the schools that exist need to be run and maintained. But I'll move on to Councillor Vernon next, please.
Thank you, Chair. The point I want to make has been raised by two councillors, and a question I would ask: is this land in a floodplain? Has it ever flooded? Because in the notes that have come to us as councillors, there's quite a bit of information about there was flood risk, permission was refused, Staffordshire County Council lead local flood authority in the absence of an acceptable drainage strategy, recommend that permission is not granted, and then later on that objection is removed. Severn Trent initially said, objection as the proposed development may have a detrimental impact on the surrounding network and treatment works with the potential to cause flooding or pollution. Now, that objection's been removed. I'd like to know why it's been removed and what strategies have been put in place, because I would hate to agree to this application and for young people to buy affordable houses, suddenly to find that every time there's a downpour in winter, the house is flooded and their investment has become worthless. So I would like to know that we are not recommending something that will be a total white elephant to the people that buy the houses. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Vernon. I think I'm right in saying that a strategy is to follow as part of the work that's done afterwards. But if you could give us some more detail on that and what floodplain zone this is in, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, as I've previously said, the Flood Authority originally raised concerns about the application. They then had discussions with the applicant in terms of the detail that was provided, and a further updated flood risk assessment and drainage strategy were submitted. The Flood Authority were reconsulted on that, and they were satisfied that a policy compliant drainage scheme could be achieved on the site. So they are happy with pre-commencement conditions for the development. In terms of the flood zone, the developable site in terms of where the residential parcels will be constructed is on flood zone 1. There is a parcel of the site that's flood zone 3, but that is where the biodiversity, net gain, ecological enhancement is going. So the Flood Authority are satisfied that the site can be adequately drained. In terms of the Severn Trent water, we tend to find that when they are consulted, they always put holding objections on sites until they've actually looked at their assets and whether or not they have any concerns about the development. And following their investigation, they came back and said, no, we're happy with the proposal subject to a recommended condition.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Hill next.
Councillor Vernon asked the very question that I was going to ask as well, but I do have another. It was mentioned that a bus is 2.5 metres wide. What's the narrowest point of the roads that the proposed traffic is due to go on?
Thank you, Councillor Evans. I think you've mentioned the width of the road before, but
yeah. Thank you, Chair. Next in the post. Then I don't have a specific measurement in front of me, but an adoptable road cannot be less than 4.8 metres because it won't be adopted. I can go and measure it. I've got the mapping in front of me. I can measure it now, but I can't give you an exact measurement. But at 4.85 metres, a car and a bus can legally pass.
Councillor Hill.
When you said that it's 4.8 and my book 2.5 and 2.5 meters, so I'm just wondering how you address that. This.
And that's what I said. Legally, an adoptable road cannot be less than 4.8 metres. I haven't got a measurement directly in front of me. That's what I'm saying. It has to be an adoptable road. It can't be anything less than 4.8. Now I've got the mapping here. I can go and measure it. Give me a couple of seconds to see what the measurements are all the way down that road. But on my site visits, I've been down there. You're obviously going to get a refuse lorry down there now. So a refuse lorry must be able to pass a car now because you're getting a refuse lorry once a week. So it's got to be over 5 metres in my judgment if you're already getting a refuse lorry. The refuse lorry is the same size as a public service vehicle because they're the same width by EU regulations. They can't be any wider. All I was trying to convey was when we were talking about roads aren't wide enough, the County Council doesn't adopt anything that's less than 4.8 ever. You would need 5 plus to get a refuse lorry and a car past each other, which I'm guessing it would be, but I can't give you a precise measurement unless I just go away and get the mapping up and measure it. But I say from my site visits, it's doable. Forgive me, audience. I do have a PCV licence. I have driven buses and coaches all around the UK. That was my part-time job. This is the proper job on a Monday to Friday. So I do have some experience of driving a bus and a coach. I got my PCV licence in 1999. I still have that licence. I still drive. I do know how to drive a PCV. So I'm not belittling the question. I'm not belittling the questions that are being sought tonight. I'm just trying to convey, yes, I'm a highway officer on a Monday to Friday basis, but a weekend I do drive something larger. I am qualified and I do have a little bit of experience of driving a large vehicle. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Chair, could I come back, Chair?
If you can just bear with me for a second, please. Just in relation to the question I think Councillor Hill was putting forward is what happens if a bus meets a bus. Yeah, I think I'm
pretty much, Chair.
Yeah, I think I'm right in saying that the proposal is to divert the bus off its regular route to come into this estate to collect and leave. So on that basis, that will be the bus going in and that will be the bus going out. There is also the possibility that it might meet the refuse collector on a different day of the week. So I get both points on that. Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just a brief question on the situation of the flooding. It appears that there's been a change of mind because mitigation has been put forward. But I think I'm right in saying that the NPPF directive is that in situations where there is a flood risk, the advice is to avoid rather than manage. And can we just have clarification on that?
Yes, Councillor Salter. I think we're going back to an answer we've had before, but I'll.
Yes, and basically the area where the site, the residential parcels are proposed is in flood zone 1, which is a low risk of flooding. Where sites are to be avoided, it's when it's on flood zone 2 and 3, which doesn't apply in this case.
Thank you. Councillor Rushton.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of questions because I think most of them have been answered from questions of other councillors. Sorry, I'll try and speak up. A lot of my questions have already been answered, but I just wanted clarification on BMV land. So I know that looking at 12.20, but a lot or 40% of this land falls in grade 2 or very good farmland, and a further 37% falls in grade 3A good land, so perfect conditions for farming. But I feel like a lot of this argument is really subjective. So I just wanted a bit of clarification on Councillor Mears' speech about footnote 7 of the protection of heritage sites. you're obviously saying that there's not a lot of effect on the heritage site, but that might not necessarily be everyone's view. That's a very subjective opinion. And the same goes for the quality of the Greenland and the green belt and the urban sprawl. It's all very subjective. So I'm leaning in a very different opinion. I think that this is a really dangerous development onto the Greenland. And yeah, I'll do it.
Thank you, Councillor Rushton. Jenny, if you can give us some details around the grade of the land, please.
Yes, that's right, Chairman. As stated in the report, it is most is grade 2 and 3A agricultural best and most versatile land. But the National Planning Policy Framework makes it clear that planning decisions have got to recognise the economic benefits of such land, and in this case an agricultural considerations report has been submitted to suggest that the loss of this land isn't economically significant when you compare the size of this site with the amount of best and most versatile land in the district as a whole. And it must also be emphasised that there is nothing in planning law that requires farmers to farm land. And equally, we haven't got any compelling evidence to say that the loss of this best and most versatile land would have an issue with food security and safety. In terms of your point, Councillor, about the heritage assets, you're absolutely right. It is subjective, and the report is based on my.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor again, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to the highways, gentlemen. It's not only the road in which the development is being built that is really, really impacted, but it's from Church Road to Swan Island, the Princes Park Island. You would not get two big vehicles past each other, you know, on there with parked cars and pedestrians. And I don't think doable is really an appropriate word to be using in this context.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Does anyone pick up on the cumulative impact and whether or not we can take that into account whilst we consider this application? You're quite right, it is the first of a number in that area, but I believe we do need to take it as an application as it is the first one.
That's right, Chairman. This is obviously the first application of this size in Burntwood, and there are two other current applications for residential development. But until an application is determined one way or another, the cumulative impacts of those developments cannot form material considerations to this current application. In terms of the reference to the National Planning Policy Framework, that relates to actually a particular paragraph, paragraph 50, in terms of prematurity and the cumulative impacts. But if you read those paragraphs which are in the planning supplement, it's very clear that the National Planning Policy Framework says that the issue of prematurity can only occur in very limited circumstances, and it says where both of these situations arise, One is that the development is so substantial and its cumulative impacts will be so significant that it would undermine the plan making process. That's one. The second is the emerging plan is at an advanced stage. Well, the emerging plan is not at an advanced stage, and paragraph 50 makes it clear that both of those situations have to be in place. So the issue of cumulative impacts is not something that can be considered as part of the consideration of this application, in my view. Thank you.
Thank you. Legal advisor, Max Howarth, if you wish to cover this point.
Sorry, Chair. I was actually going to address the reasons at the moment and also the potential for consulting the Secretary of State. As members are probably aware, this is a development over 150 dwellings. As such, there is a statutory obligation to consult the Secretary of State if you're minded to refuse the application. But I'll come to that in a moment once perhaps the Chair has heard from any other speakers. But I'd also like to address the reasons for refusal as well if members are minded to go down that route, Chair, because obviously whilst I have a general idea as to what those reasons are, members should be aware, or they will no doubt be aware, they need to give clear, convincing planning reasons for refusal. Clearly, if you don't give clear and convincing planning reasons, then there is the risk, if this isn't called in by the Secretary of State and it goes to an appeal, that there is the potential for adverse costs awards on the basis of unreasonable behaviour. So I think it's really important, Chair, that we, before we go to the vote, that we address the reasons to make sure they're clear and concise.
Thank you. I've got two of the speakers, Councillor Vernon and Councillor Anketel. After that, I shall ask for the substantive reasons. At the moment, I have a proposal for refusal and a seconder for refusal. So after these two people have spoken, we'll go into whether or not we can substantiate the grounds for the vote. Councillor Vernon, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to go back to something the Senior Planning Officer said when we were talking about flooding. And she said that the flood risk could be mitigated. Now, could is totally different to will. And you did mention as well that most of the area is in a flood risk 1, but one area is in a flood risk zone 3. And when Councillor Salt was talking about refusal if there is a flood risk, you said that flood risk 1 wouldn't lead to automatic non-approval, but flood risk 2 or 3 would. Now, you have said there is a flood risk 3 on part of the site. So the one thing I would say, slightly tongue-in-cheek, that on new housing developments, the houses come with a national building certificate. Perhaps we could propose that the builders gave an indemnity certificate that there would be no risk of any flooding, so that people could buy the house knowing that they were not liable for flooding at a future date.
Thank you, Councillor Vernon. Just in relation to the floodplain 3, that area is being set aside for the biodiversity aspects of this development. There are no houses on that area. In relation to it could, it would, because if they don't meet the LLFA's requirements for dealing with any drainage issues, it would not get passed and therefore not be approved, and it could not go forward. So the word could is at the moment, but it can't go ahead unless it's would. I don't know if you want to add anything.
I want to say it better myself.
That makes a change. Right, moving on to Councillor Anketel, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a house. Most of us, if not all of us, have houses. Other people need houses also. The question is, where do we put these houses? We need more affordable houses and more social houses as well. But again, if we don't have a house here, where should we put it?
Thank you. I don't think there was a question there, but thank you for your views. Right. I've got a proposal to refuse, and that is seconded from Councillor Evans, and Councillor Galvin has seconded. The notes that I've got in front of me here refer to infrastructure, schools, roads inadequate, green belts, infrastructure again, schools and integrated care board, highways again, the LLFA, conservation, education again, floodplain. I do need to point out at the moment that there are no statutory objections from the statutory agencies involved in this application. We do all have opinions. My opinion is usually right, I find, except when it isn't. And there are lots of people better trained than I to make decisions, and that's why we call on the people we do. Councillor Evans, can you go for your substantive reasons, having the reasons for refusal that you wish to note, please?
Well, I think you've outlined them fairly well, Chair, but I'm on loss of important greenbelt, which is significant, and as has been pointed out, it is still agricultural land that can be used for agriculture. A total lack of infrastructure that Burntwood requires now and in the future. And that includes obviously health provision, dental provision, and the schools, which we certainly need to ensure that we have adequate provision for that, especially as now rising twos are being encouraged to be attached to schools. And on highways grounds, which has been mentioned, the widths of the roads and the congestion that will bring. And it's not just, as I mentioned at the time, not just the roads that are close to the site, but the ones that are accessed off Swan Island and the other end of the Rugeley Road, which is very often totally congested. So for all those reasons, that's why I move refusal.
Before we respond on that, Councillor Galvin, do you have any additional reasons to add to that?
No, it's just to confirm really that, you know, and add some more local knowledge that presently Bridge Cross Road gets incredibly busy of a night. It's not near to where this development is, but because that's busy, people do rat runs and people head towards Church Lane, Farewell Lane already. So adding, it's already busy during rush hours, and just adding more houses is going to make it worse. Doubling down on the highways.
Thank you. I have got one other councillor who has asked to speak, and that's the Vice Chair, Councillor Ashton. So I am going to let him speak for yourself, Max.
I'd just like to ask the officers if the projected congestion constitutes a BE1 note, a BE1 condition.
Right. Someone help me. What's a BE1?
Through you, Chair. Policy BE1 of the local plan refers to impacts on residential amenity. So just to clarify, I think Councillor Ashton, you're asking whether or not the highways impact would also impact on the residential amenities of the community.
Okay. Max Howarth, legal advisor, I'm going to come to yourself in relation to the conditions or the reasons given.
Thank you, Chair. I think before I address the reasons, what I'd like to say first of all is, in terms of any motion to move to refuse the matter, I think the way I would approach it is that the local planning authority will have to consult the Secretary of State because there are over 150 dwellings. There's a consultation period of 21 days. So the LPA cannot determine the application until that 21-day period is up. So if members are minded to refuse the application, what I would suggest is that rather than resolve to refuse the application on the grounds you've just put forward, that you delegate authority to the head of service to refuse the application after that 21-day period has passed, because obviously once 21 days has passed, if the Secretary of State hasn't indicated they wish to call in the application, then the LPA is then free to determine the application. So I think any motion to refuse needs to be framed in that context. With regard to the reasons...
Sorry, Max. You might have to do that one again for me.
Okay, sorry. So in terms of the resolution to refuse, rather than it being just a straightforward resolution to refuse the application for the reasons set out, it would be to delegate authority to the head of service to refuse the application after 21 days has passed from the date the LPA has consulted the Secretary of State.
Right, thank you. It was the fact I missed the refuse bit after 21 days. I just thought delegate authority to the principal planning officer after 21 days, whether we'd heard or not. So thank you.
Absolutely,
that for me.
With regards to the reasons for refusal, I mean, the first one is Greenbelt. I think members really do need to set out on what basis they're saying that the application should be refused on Greenbelt grounds. In the officer report, the officer takes the view that it's grey belts. They've set out in the report why they say it's grey belt, why it doesn't contribute to the Greenbelt purposes, also why it meets the golden rules. Now, if members are going to come to a contrary decision, they need to set out exactly why they disagree with the officer's recommendation. It's not simply enough just to say that it's green belt and therefore it should be refused. They need to set out why it's not grey belt in their view, and also then we're in the situation where there may be a very special circumstances argument in relation to whether or not it should be granted. So I think members really need to address why it's not grey belt, and they also need to address as well why there would not be any very special circumstances for granting the application as well, if they're saying it's not grey belt. With regards to the infrastructure, clearly the statutory consultees have been consulted. They've not made any requests in relation to infrastructure. They're the experts that are consulted by the council, people like the ICB, people like the Education Authority. If the LPA were now to say, well, we're going to refuse it on grounds that there is insufficient infrastructure, when the statutory consultees have not requested any contribution, then where is the evidence base for that? Because if there is no evidence base, then that is unreasonable behaviour and is likely to result in a cost award, if that's one of the reasons. The same goes for highway impact. As members are aware, under the NPPF, you should only be refusing an application on highway grounds where the cumulative impacts are severe. Now, the Highway Authority have said they don't take that view. They've raised no objection to the application. They've said it's acceptable in highway terms. Unless members have evidence to suggest otherwise and to contradict the Highway Authority, who are the experts in these matters, then clearly, again, that is potentially unreasonable behaviour. So I think members need to give some really, need to give some clear thoughts to their reasons, really, and need to explain exactly why, for example, the development is not acceptable on Greenbelt grounds, and also on what basis you're saying there's a lack of infrastructure, and also on what basis you're saying that the cumulative impacts in relation to the highway are severe.
Thank you. As you can see, this is all clear. Right. At this point in time, before we clarify the grey belt, I'm going to do the vote at this point, because depending on which way that vote goes, depends on whether or not we need to determine what a grey belt is. Councillor Salter, if it's quick points.
Yeah, a bit of a curveball, really. I appreciate this is an outline application, which means, in very simple terms, can we build on this land or not? As opposed to, this is exactly what we want to put on the land. We've heard compelling comments from objectors, substantiated with various facts, rules, regulations, policies, etc. I just wonder if there's any room for, and I hate to use the word deferral, in order to gain more information on what will be provided or what the intention is in full, particularly when it comes to this flood mitigation and the access, access and travel, etc.
Right, Councillor Salter, we're here for outline planning application. If it's refused, there will be no further work done it by the applicant. They spent a lot of money to put these packages together. The legal advisor wishes to come back in because I think I just tried to go down the wrong direction, so I'll let him correct me.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to the votes, the members need to set out their clear, convincing reasons why they are minded to refuse the application before they go to the votes.
Chair, could I say something? And we have never done this before in a planning meeting.
I'll say yes then.
But could we, as the planning committee, withdraw to discuss this amongst ourselves? We can't discuss it across the tables. It would be worthwhile because we are going to make a decision which could actually cost the council a lot of money. We've been advised by experts.
Councillor Vernon, we can't take into consideration how much it might cost the council. What we should be considering is the arguments that have been put forward.
Yes, we've been given
the paperwork that's been put forward. It's probably the most comprehensive money application document that I've seen put together. Probably because so many people wrote it in the first place, saying can't do this because, and for that reason, there is lots of I's dotted and T's crossed. So I'm going to go to ask for the specific reasons for the grey belt. I get the impression at the moment that the council officers and the legal advisor are not comfortable in being able to support an infrastructure or highways reason. Would I be correct in saying that from a planning perspective? Thank you. So the grey belt side of things. Does someone have some sort of wording that can put this back to being purely green belts and of valuable land? Councillor Evans.
Chair, we as the Burntwood councillors, we know the area, which is why we've spoken as we have spoken. We are totally familiar with the area that is being mentioned. And as far as Greenbelt goes, I think Councillor Rushton expressed the reasons why. He was talking about the fact that the land can still be used for agricultural land, which to me indicates that it can be Greenbelt and is Greenbelt. As far as Greybelt goes, this is a very new system to us, and I don't think we have any proof that the land, somebody else might have an idea, but I have no proof that this land is Greybelt, and I still maintain it's Greenbelt.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. I'm going to come back to Councillor Rushton, who's just been quoted.
Again, it goes to the subjectiveness, but I consider this unrestricted sprawl onto the countryside or onto Greenbelt, which I know that you've weighed in to say you don't think it is, but I personally do think it's unrestricted sprawl. And I was also going to ask about possibly another condition, being the harm to character of the local landscape and heritage assets as well.
Max.
Thank you, Chair. I think just to address the heritage ground for refusal, the conservation officer has assessed the application. He's taken the view that he agrees with the applicants in relation to there's one particular heritage asset where there is a low degree of less than substantial harm. Now, if the councillors, it's within their gift to come to a different conclusion, but conservation officer is the heritage expert. If you're going to disagree with his view, you need to say why and on what basis, what evidence you're relying upon to come to a different opinion to the conservation officer.
Right. At this point in time, in relation to Grey Belt, do the planning officers believe that they would have something substantial to defend this if it were refused? Max?
Sorry, Chair. What can I say? I like the same voice. I think in relation to the Greenbelt argument, if members are minded to refuse the application on Greenbelt grounds, they need to say why. They need to say why it's inappropriate developments in the Greenbelt, why it isn't Grey Belt, and of course, perhaps, you know, it might help if the officer puts up the slide, yeah, so the members can actually go through it and see what they're actually applying, but they need to say why it's inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, i.e. why it's not Grey Belt, and why there are no very special circumstances for allowing the application. So they need to go through the Greenbelt tests, the Grey Belt tests even.
Okay, the screen is appearing before us again.
Through you, Chair. So there are two steps to the Grey Belt and the Green Belt impact. The first is the site Grey Belt. So you can see on the screen there, you've got the land does not strongly contribute to these three purposes: to check unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas, to prevent neighbouring towns from merging into one another, and to preserve the setting and special character of historic towns. Alongside footnote 7, which says that if there is a strong reason to refuse on grounds of heritage, ecology, flooding, etc. So members need to be happy that, members need to be satisfied, is it Grey Belt or not? Then the second step is it an appropriate development or not, which is the next pie chart where we've got lots of other considerations. So will I stop there? So once if a site is considered to be Grey Belt, then there's five requirements to work out whether or not development is inappropriate. One of them being the site is Grey Belt. The second, that the development would not fundamentally undermine the purposes of the remaining Green Belt, which are set up there on the slide: to assist and safeguard in the countryside from encroachment, to assist in urban regeneration by encouraging other recycling of derelict and other urban land. Now, members may recall from the training there are 5 purposes of the Green Belt. So 3 are important in the Grey Belt requirement, 2 are important in the is it inappropriate development argument. Then the chart goes on to say there has to be demonstrable unmet need for the development proposed. We all know we do not have an adequate housing land supply. The site provides where golden rules are applicable, and that's set out in the report. It does provide an officer's opinion, and the site is in a sustainable location. Now, officers have concluded that all these requirements are met. If members decide that one or more of these requirements are not met, then that needs to feed into your reason for refusal.
I've got 2 other councillors that wish to speak, presumably in relation to the Grey Belt issues. Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think there's a lot to be said for this development. I won't get any applause, I know, but I do think there is a case to be made that, given what's said at as I said before, what's said at paragraph 1707, I think it is, that for purpose A, that this patch of land, parcel of land, it says it's moderately, and I think the local knowledge might raise moderately to significantly contributes to unrestricted sprawl. It clearly potentially does. It doesn't. We know Walsall's not a historic town, so Burntwood's not a historic town, and it doesn't stop Burntwood beating Lichfield or even Gentleshire, but it potentially does contribute to checking unrestricted sprawl. So I don't think you want to applaud me because I'm not a good, but so I think that's potentially it.
Can I just check, in relation to the protected areas for development of, there are heritage towns, very little around villages. Does Burntwood qualify under anything that protects it from having planning around the outside of it?
Thanks, Chair. In the report, can't quite hear exactly where it was, but basically with the new Greenbelt 26 review, it considered this site, but it was actually part of a much larger site called BUR06, which actually extended right up to Nether Lane and across to Rugeley Road and Coulter Lane and Church Road. So a much larger parcel of land than the application site is. And the Greenbelt review considered that the site contributed moderately to Purpose A. The framework requires a strong contribution for it not to be grey belt, along with Purpose B and D, but the Greenbelt review considered Purpose B weak and Purpose D not relevant.
Thank you. Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's just a quick one. I have a definition here of UK planning policy on grey belt, and it says it refers to poor quality, underutilised or previously developed brownfield land located within the protected green belt. I should think this must suit that. So, you know, take your choice.
Right, come back from no, come back. Okay. We'll go to the vote. I think, Christine, do you want to explain the votes? I can think I can do it. The other matters for refusal at the moment, we've got grey belt. Does anyone have anything in relation to infrastructure and highways to put forward as a reason? Councillor Taylor.
Hello, did have my hand up before about green belts. The council's own Staffordshire Greenbelt study of April 2026 finds this line makes a strong contribution to Greenbelt purpose, safeguarding the countryside from encroachment, describing a strong, moderate degree of openness taken together with other Greenbelt purposes. The development would fundamentally undermine the openness and purpose of the remaining Greenbelt.
Just to clarify with the planning officer, was that in relation to this particular site or a much bigger site?
It was in relation to a much bigger site, and I don't actually think, from what I recall, it says it fundamentally undermines the Greenbelt purposes. The study does actually say that the site contributes to Purpose C strongly, and that is recorded in my report. But as I then explain, that's relating to a much larger site than Coulter Lane's application site. And that's why the reason I've said it wouldn't result in undermining that purpose. In relation to the Greenbelt study, it actually concludes that it is grey belt. It could be considered grey belt, subject to footnote 7 restrictions. It does say that.
Thank you. I've got done Councillor Powell. Right, we're still looking for substantive reasons in relation to infrastructure and highways. Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, my hand was raised on the Greenbelt issue. It's a little bit of clarity on this. I think I've just heard that the ability to redefine grey belt in this instance covers a very much larger area than the site that we have in front of us at the moment. And as an overall, it's less significant, if you like. If this particular site, as an isolated area, is of high significance or medium to high significance, and the rest of it isn't so important, then the overall is less important. But if you take out one that is very significant, it looks like we may be taking out one that is very significant. I'm sort of mixing my words up here, but yeah, can we not look at this particular site, there is one or two fields or whatever, rather than the whole package as being significant or not as significant? You understand what I'm trying to say? I'm tying myself up in knots a little bit. But if just that, if the one area that we're looking at is of great significance within the large package, then surely we must look at it differently.
If I can just,
by all means.
I think what you're saying is that if I'm correct, that the green belt study looked at a much larger area, and you're saying, well, actually, can we just look at the smaller area that relates to the application site? My point is that the study considered the larger area as grey belt, subject to footnote 7. We're talking about a smaller area within that, which is actually much closer to the built form. So to say that a larger area that includes bigger areas of countryside with not a lot of built form to the boundaries as grey belt, subject to footnote 7, in effect makes it a stronger argument to say that the application site, which is adjacent to the built form, it is actually stronger.
It wasn't so much, if I may, Chair, the being adjacent to a previously built or already built area. It's the contribution that that small parcel within the whole makes. So if that small parcel that we're looking at gives a greater contribution to the green belt status, then it should be looked at separately.
I think I can see the mathematical logic behind what you were saying, but if everything is gauged as grey belt, if you only take part of it, do you then raise part of the bit that was grey belt back up to green belt? So mathematically, I don't know. Right. In relation to other substantive reasons, sorry, Max, missed you again.
Sorry, Chair, I don't mean to labour the point, but I don't feel members have actually set out clearly why they're saying the land is not grey belt. They've not set out their reasoning for that reason for refusal.
Except I think the issue that we've got is definition of grey belts and where the balance sits. The feel I get is that the people here feel that grey belt is still green belt, whereas the planning policies and directives given and planning laws suggest that this land is suited to be grey belt. I don't know how we come to compromise on that.
I mean, I think Kerry's gone through the grey belt and what needs to be considered for it to be grey belt, all the different elements. Now, members need to look at that and to say what they disagree with officers in relation to that assessment and why they disagree with officers. Because in terms of the reason for refusal, the reason for refusal has to be clear. It'll be in the decision notice. It'll have to clearly set out why this isn't deemed to be grey belt, why it's inappropriate development in the green belt, and also why there are no very special circumstances for granting the application. Okay. So
I know we've just been asked to take it off the screen so people upstairs and elsewhere can see what's happening in the room rather than just on the screen. But as it's the screen bit that's relevant, we will have that up there for a moment. And I will ask councillors to look at particular sections and come up with their reasons why they believe it is not within, why it is breached on those sections, please. Councillor Galvin.
Yeah, I just think we need to bring in the human factors about this. Humans are make mistakes. You know, it's someone sat down and has come up with the definition about these parcels of land being grey belts. I disagree. I disagree with their conclusion. It's an active farm. Until recently, had sheep in there. You know, how much more farmy can you get? I don't know, but I'm really struggling with how Greenbelt isn't Greenbelt and it's an active farm, so that someone can put houses on there.
Does anyone have anything else in relation to the actual points that are on the board? I understand what you're saying, Councillor Calvin, but does anyone have anything else? Councillor Hill.
Question really. The question is it already designated as grey belt, or are we deciding whether it's grey belt tonight?
I'll go to the officer.
Thank you, Chairman. No, it's green belt land at the moment.
Thank you. If we can have a bit of quiet, please. Councillor Vernon.
I think that announcement there has just cleared my head a little bit and perhaps helped me make formulate a decision. I was actually going to say, to avoid us having to make a decision, we could perhaps refer to what the legal advisor said, that we can defer a definite decision. I didn't quite follow what you said, sir, that we can defer our decision for 21 days.
Right, sorry, Councillor Vernon. What he's explaining is the new rules indicate that we as a committee and as a local authority cannot turn down anything over 150 houses. There is a 21-day period where it gets referred to the Secretary of State for them to decide whether or not we have the right to turn that application down, or they can grant it. I think that's the situation before us.
Just to explain the process to members, within that 21 days, if you're minded to refuse the application, the council will have to notify the Secretary of State that you're minded to refuse the application and it's over 150 dwellings. Secretary of State will then have 21 days to call it in. If they don't call it in, once that 21-day period has expired, you can then go on to refuse it and issue the refusal notice. If the Secretary of State calls in the application, then you'll have to convene a public inquiry and appoint an inspector to determine whether or not the application should be granted or refused. That inspector will then prepare a report, which will go to the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State will have the ultimate decision whether or not to grant or refuse it based upon his inspector's recommendation.
Max, going to come back just on one thing. If they weren't to call it in within the 21 days and Bloor Homes went to appeal, they could still do that.
Once the 21-day period is expired, if the application is refused, then Bloor Homes can appeal the application. And that's when it's really important that members set out their reasons for refusal and set out clear and convincing reasons, because obviously it will go before an inspector and appeal. And obviously, if he finds that they aren't substantiated, then he may take the view that the local planning authority has acted unreasonably, and that may expose the council to potentially an adverse costs award. So this is what's really important that members set out their reasons clearly and concisely.
Gary, you're about to you pull the mic right towards you.
Sorry, apologies, members. I'm returning to this slide again. The site is Greenbelt, but the submissions argue that the site is Greybelt, so we can't ignore that. We have to go. The Greybelt argument cannot be ignored. It is a policy that is set out in the National Planning Policy Framework. So we can't just say, no, we don't like it. No, we think it's Greenbelt and it should remain Greenbelt. We have to say why. Now, the assessment criteria for Greybelt is clearly set out on the screen. It sets out the requirements in line with the NPPF. The first stage, I feel like I'm saying this again, is the first stage is it grey belt? And the second stage is, if it is grey belt, I think I've also said that there is a policy that sets out grey belt, and we cannot ignore that grey belt policy. If it passes the first stage, it is grey belt as set out in the National Planning Policy Framework. It then goes on, the NPPF then goes on to set out, is the development inappropriate? And there's another range of criteria. So there's quite a few ranges of criteria that it has to get through. What we need from members is a clear and convincing justification as to why this site does not meet these criteria.
Councillor Taylor.
Can I just ask the legal officer, if we were to refuse with the advised 21-day period, would then this development be taken into account with the other developments that are coming forward at Highfields and Rakehill? So then they could be taken in as a whole, or would they all be separate?
I can see logic on that one. We haven't got a meeting for more than 21 days, so I don't think you will come in on that one. Well, Max?
In relation to your decision tonight, I mean, if you're minded to refuse the application, that would be your resolution. You'd be minded to refuse it, subject to it not being called in within 21 days of the Secretary of State being consulted, and you would be delegating authority to the head of service then to refuse it after that 21-day period. So that would be effectively your resolution. This isn't, a way of kicking the can down the road and trying to delay the determination of the application until other developments come forwards. I mean, that is potentially unreasonable behaviour. So you have to be very clear tonight in your reasons for refusal. If you're minded to refuse, you have to set out your reasons for refusal tonight. And then obviously there needs to be some mechanism whereby if the application is not called in by the Secretary of State after the 21-day period, that the head of service can then obviously affect your wishes by refusing the application under a delegated authority.
Right. It really feels like we're getting nowhere quickly here. We have a situation where the statutory authorities have not put in any objections in relation to infrastructure, highways. The grey belt, green belt assessment is done by our professionally qualified planners and principal planner overseeing. We need to come up with the substantive reasons to vote against. We don't agree that it's grey belt. Is an argument. Councillor Galvin, if you want to clarify it better, that'd be brilliant.
I'll just try again. Does this land, I believe this land strongly contributes to checking unrestricted sprawl. That's the reason that I'm arguing checking unrestricted sprawl. That's why I believe it's green belt and not grey belt, and that's why I'm arguing this way. I like it. I know I'm disagreeing with the experts. But
I'm going to go for a professional opinion on that. Basically, you could never build on any piece of new land if every bit outside of the town that currently exists or village that currently exists can't be built on because it's unrestricted sprawl. This is 250 houses, but I'll come back in relation to the unrestricted sprawl argument.
So unrestricted sprawl is part A of the requirements for the green belt. Officers have clearly set out why we consider that it complies with this. It does not strongly contribute to this requirement. So if members, it is a member's gift. If they consider that to be the alternative, then that is our reason for refusal.
Yeah, we just don't like grey belts. Don't quite know where to go with this one. Thank you, Christine. Save me.
Sorry, I'm pressing the wrong button there. We have a reason, and it's up for the committee to decide whether they agree with that reason. And the reason regarding the green belt is that it checks the unrestricted sprawl. And I'll apologise if I've got that wrong, but I'm just taking what Councillor Galvin has said. What we can do is, so currently I have 3 reasons for refusal, and please put your hand up if there was anything to be added, because I've been trying to take copious notes. So the loss of green belt and the fact that it is not believed to be grey belt due to it would check the unrestricted sprawl, lack of infrastructure, and on highway grounds. So those are the 3 reasons that I have. I know there's been discussions about flooding or not. It will get to the point of it is a committee decision, okay? And we can take a vote on whether the committee agrees those reasons. And I want to go through the process that we'll go through just to be completely transparent for everybody watching, whether in this room, upstairs or elsewhere. So the committee will need to take a vote on whether they agree with those reasons for refusal and they want to, in essence, replace the officer's recommendation for this one for refusal. That doesn't mean that it would be refused. It just says that you are making it the substantial recommendation. If that then goes through, we would go to the vote on whether it is actually refused. But I do think we need to get to a point, like I said, whether officers, etc., feel that the reasons are weak, you as a committee do have the right to vote on those reasons.
Right then, the motion is that we change the recommendation on the report and that we change it to it being a refusal for this application, put forward by Councillor Evans, seconded by Councillor Galvin. The first vote is to establish whether or not we are changing the substantive motion, i.e. I'll be voting for or against. So all those...
Sorry, and that is a mistake of mine. Obviously, taking into account what our legal advisor has said, the recommendation would actually be minded to refuse on those grounds, subject to 21 days. And after 21 days, you would delegate it to the head of service to refuse it on those grounds. Are you satisfied with that, Max?
Nearly, yeah. I think probably the way I would phrase it is that committee are minded to refuse the application and they delegate authority to the principal planning officer to refuse the application once the 21-day period for consultant secretary of state has expired.
Right, we're going to vote for those who are minded to refuse. So if I can have a clear show of hands, all those who would like to move the substantive motion to be minded to refuse. I hope there weren't too many negatives in that. Okay, so all those in favour of the new proposal to be minded to refuse. No. 9-4. All those against, please. 1, 2, 2. Abstentions? So the new substantive motion is for refusal. Do we need further debate prior to? I don't think we're going to get anywhere with further debate, but so all those who are voting to refuse this application, please have a show of hands. Sorry. Sorry. And the
I've got the grounds as loss of green belt and that it's not grey belt due to the unrestricted sprawl, loss of infrastructure and highways reasons. That's what I've got, and they haven't clarified further.
Sorry, Max, please.
Sorry, Chair. I think sometimes less is more. I mean, obviously, members appear to be minded to refuse the application, but it's probably better to rely upon a reason for refusal that may be able to be substantiated on an appeal. Now, the two reasons for refusal which are given, the second and third, the lack of infrastructure and also the impact on the highway network, are not supported by any technical or expert evidence. Now, if the council goes to an appeal with those as reasons for refusal, and the applicant is put to wasted expense in trying to appeal those grounds, if the council doesn't have any expert evidence to substantiate those grounds, that is unreasonable behaviour and it will be subject to a cost award.
So are you adding in that as a reason, or asking that, saying that can't be a reason with that?
I think what I'm saying, Chair, is that members need to say on what basis are they coming to the conclusion that they disagree with the statutory consultees in relation to the infrastructure requirements of this development, and also the highway authority in relation to the highway impact. How are they going to substantiate that? What evidence are they relying on? Because if it's just they disagree, that isn't actually a sound planning reason for refusal.
I fully understand what you're saying. However, we're not making any headway into this. I think councillors are minded to make a certain decision. Councillor Powell?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll move it that we go with what the legal officer has said to at least give us a fighting chance of having something to do with this, other than giving opportunity if we've got weaker reasons to be picked up and possibly lose the whole thing.
Is that an old councillor? Is that Councillor Evans? I think is the new addition to the list.
Yes, Joe, we're obviously not the technical or legal experts, but we've gone with what we believe in. We've gone with what the public have asked us to think about, whether or not everybody agrees with that or not. And I honestly think that we're in a situation now where we're being tied up in knots where we cannot go any further with this now, other than the fact of the reasons that have been given as far as infrastructure, highways, ground, and we've spoken about the green belt. So I can't see why we can't have we've got to have a final vote on all of this, that the reasons that have been given, because I think that is important. And every time we're saying something, the officer's coming back with something else that we need to decide. And that is impossible.
Councillor Taylor?
A lot of this has gone through the officers, and it's the officers' opinion. We live in Burntwood. We live in Burntwood. We go around. We all know this place. We all know that this is this development is in an inappropriate area. Regardless of grain, but whether it's greenbelt land, it's just not an appropriate development in an appropriate location. There are plenty of other locations around Burntwood that would be more appropriate than there.
Legal officer again.
Thank you, Chair. Ultimately, it is within members' gift to refuse the application, and for whatever reasons they want to give for refusing the application. We've given the advice. There needs to be clear, convincing reasons. Otherwise, the council may be subject to an adverse cost award if they're found to have acted unreasonably during an appeal. Now, at the end of the day, it's committee of decision maker, Chair. It's a matter for them what decision they take. Obviously, they've been advised of the risks. So
thank you.
I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Christine.
So Max has actually kind of reiterated what I was about to say. As a committee, you have voted to replace the recommendation with what you have. You have taken the advice of all officers, including the legal officer. it is up to you now, when we go to this vote to refusal, to be satisfied that you are voting with all that information, including that of the legal officer. If you are minded now to change your mind, then you don't. Sorry, if you could let me finish. What I was to say is, now taking in mind all of that legal advice, it is up for the committee to decide whether you wish to still vote for the refusal or abstain, or to approve it based on all the advice, because you have now voted to make that substantial recommendation refusal. Okay, so that is what we are now going to vote on. And you can do that with all the information at hand.
Could you,
Thank you, Christine. Councillor Vernon.
Could you just please read out the reasons for refusal? I mean, in Greenbelt, I would like you to add it is still used for agricultural purposes.
We can't do that because you have voted to change the substantial recommendation. If you wish now to amend that, we would have to lose this current vote and you would have to put a new amendment through.
I thought those were the reasons you were going to give.
So the reasons have been what we put, and it is that you would be minded to refuse based on what Max have said. It is that it is the loss of green belt, and that you do not believe that it is grey belt due to the, sorry, bear with me, the checks of unrestricted sprawl. It is lack of infrastructure and on highways grounds. You have been advised that those other two may not, but you have already voted to make that the substantial motion. Just bearing in mind, it is minded to refuse, and it would be delegated to be refused after 21 days, depending on whether it's called in. Okay.
Okay, thank you. In that case, we're going to come to the vote in relation to refusal with the conditions previously stated. Councillor Salter.
Sorry, Chair, thank you. If I understood Christine correctly, we could at this point modify the vote in that we've been advised that the two secondary reasons would probably just not hold water because of the evidence given by the experts. Should we perhaps consider modifying the vote to purely look at the green belt and the sprawl situation rather than all three? Again, it's making the best that we can.
Right. I think at this point, are you making a proposal that we have another amendment, and is that seconded? So are you proposing this?
I find it very difficult to look at agreeing to this proposal, so development, but to put an objection in on grounds that have been clearly identified by the experts bodies that we refer to for advice, the highways, etc., then we don't really have a leg to stand on to object to their decisions. So I think the one that we do have a chance, as explained by Max, but that is the first.
You want to propose an amendment?
Sorry.
So you want to propose an amendment?
Propose the amendment, yeah.
Okay. So is that seconded, please, by anybody? Okay, not seconded. Councillor Hill.
Can I just add that I'm not objecting to development of housing. My issue. My issue is that I'm worried about me making a decision about whether something is green belt or not green belt, and then that becoming a precedent upon which others will use. Okay, so that's my only concern. I am happy to trust, so long as it's not seeming to come that I'm making that decision, grey belt.
We've had full explanations of the difference between green belt and grey belt. We've got our planning officers who are qualified, trained. They have given their opinion. We've had legal advice as their opinion. We've had people's opinions from the back as well. And all of those opinions are valid, and you need to weigh up and consider when making your decision in relation to this vote. If it does go to the Secretary of State, that will then become their decision. If it does go to appeal, and then becomes that decision. But the decision you're being asked to make tonight is that you're minded to refuse this application on the grounds that we've already agreed. So I'm going to move to a vote now. So all those in favour of the new substantive motion, which is refusal, please show your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All those against, please. 2. And abstentions, please. Right. On tonight's application, 25/01485/OUTM. At this point, the committee has voted to refuse this application. Minded to refuse this application, 9 votes to 2. We don't have the power to do it, so this will now become, after 21 days, if not called in, delegated to the principal planning officer, who will refuse it on that basis. So, first of all, it's down to Secretary of State, and secondly, it will be down to any appeal that may come. So, thank you very much for it. I want to thank the officers in particular. This is the most in-depth report that I have seen coming to planning committee. And largely, I'd like to thank the public as well, because if you hadn't asked so many questions, we wouldn't have had quite as an in-depth report as we've had. So, right, for those people who do wish to leave, and that includes me, but I can't because we've got another application, feel free to leave. Do any of the members want a 3 or 4 minute break to get some water and lose some water? Brilliant.
Thank you, Chair. Can everybody hear me? For a start, yeah. Okay, item 2 on the agenda tonight is Wellsmead. You may recognise this site because we have had applications before us before. So this relates to a site in the Greenbelt in Camwell. It comprises of a number of buildings which are used, have a historic use as sales, servicing and repair of lawnmowers. This was granted by a lawful development certificate in 2019. More recently, we approved the change of use of an existing building on the site for car sales. Members may recall that. And as part of that approval, we conditioned improvements to the access, which have been carried out. Members may also recall that there was a further application this year to refuse this building that's shown on the screen here. So this was built towards the rear of the site, and the reasons for refusal were that it failed to comply with Greenbelt policy and Greybelt. So that was to retain it in its existing form, and the reason for that was the volume. It didn't meet with any of the exceptions set out for Greenbelt policy in the NPPF. Since then, we've had negotiations with the applicant. Just show you the photographs there. That's the access into the site. And then this plan is the important one, really. So the large black square in the middle, that and the smaller black square, they were approved as car sales. It's not car sales like a car showroom. I think there was a strict condition that restricted it, that they stored the cars in there, and then the sales would occur online, and then somebody would meet them on site. So the red building at the back is the one that's in question at the moment. And like I said before, that was refused because it didn't comply with the Greenbelt exceptions. One of the exceptions is the paragraph 154 sets out the replacement of a building as long as it is not materially larger than what was there before. So there is an exception which the applicant can take advantage of. And this application seeks to address that by removing some of the existing buildings on site. So by removing some of the volume, we'd be retaining the volume of the red building at the back. Officers concur that this would meet, if this had happened before. This is a retrospective application, which is not always great, but it's not incorrect. People do that, and it does happen. So we now consider that this complies with all of the Greenbelt policies, and in particular that Greenbelt exception. So officers have got no reason to recommend refusal. It is therefore a recommend approval. I should add, we have received on Friday afternoon, after we published the supplementary, we did receive an update from the County Highway Authority raising no objections to this proposal on the basis of the two of the conditions, one of which was that the purple buildings are removed, which is set out in the recommendation, and the other one that the access improvements are retained, again set out in the recommendation. We've got some slides showing the original building and the replacement building, but I think you're all aware of that because of the photographs. And I think that concludes the presentation, really. In principle, it's now considered to be acceptable. There's no impact on residential amenity. I'm struggling to see that on the screen. I've actually got it right in front of me. In terms of parking and access, it's considered to be acceptable. We have got an update, no highway objection, and no responses were received from local residents, no objections received from statutory consultees. Recommendation before you is to approve, subject to the conditions set out in the report.
Thank you, Kerry. Just clarify, you might have said it, but my head's a bit blown at the moment. Just in relation to the conditions, there are 3 buildings to be removed within a certain time period. Was that 3 months?
Bear with me and I'll check. I believe it was. Yes, 3 months. There is also an outstanding enforcement notice on this site. So again, I think we've been in this position before where we do have the sort of backup that enforcement, if that's not carried out, then obviously there'd be more implications.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got Councillor Powell expressing interest to speak first.
Yes, thank you, Chair. In the old adage, if you try again, eventually you get there. I think this application, it's the third or fourth time I've sat here and seen the same particular one come up. It looks okay now, so I'll move recommendation and acceptance.
Councillor Ashton?
I second the acceptance. The point I was going to make was to do with condition you've already talked about. Second.
Marshall, welcome back. Else wish to speak? Councillor Vernon?
I was just going to ask, will there be any check to make certain that the other buildings are demolished?
Through you, Chair. Yes, the planning enforcement team will keep an eye on that.
Okay. You all wanted to speak so much last time. Moving on then, we'll move to a vote in relation to the recommendation is to approve the application. Can I have a show of hands of all those in favour, please? On that basis, anyone putting their hand up again for against? Any abstentions? No. So that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much to all those people who have watched this evening online. You've got a real insight to the different aspects of planning, as have some of the planning committee, the officers and myself. Thank you very much for your time, particularly to the officers who presented this evening, that first application. I know there was a lot of work goes into it. Now we move into a different phase, and we'll be back again in September for anyone who wants to watch another.